Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are James chapter 5 and Proverbs 27. I'm sitting here in a rather noisy Melbourne airport waiting to fly home after a week-long trip down here in Australia. Great place to be wrapping up the book of James. Now, this last chapter, chapter 5 in James, talks about wealth. Plenty of that down here in Australia. It talks about patience, and it talks about that famous prayer to see sick people well. And so to the wealthy it says, you have hoarded wealth in the last days. So it's not a blanket criticism of the wealthy. It's those who under tough times have sat on their wealth and not helped anybody. The wages you failed to pay to your workers, it says in verse 4. The cries of the harvesters, abusing people, in other words, stomping over people to protect yourselves. Your self-indulgence, you fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter when everybody else was struggling. You just looked after number one, and you condemned and murdered the innocent ones. And so that there is a sober warning for those who are absolutely mindless about the plight of others around them. God gives you wealth, it's saying, use your wealth to change society, change the world in which you live. Then it moves on to talk about patience, don't grumble. You heard about Job's perseverance, and don't duck and dive. It basically says in verse 12, do not swear, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond that, you're ducking and diving, and it's not right. Well, verse 14 moves us to the great and famous prayer that chapter 5 is well known for. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. One of our elders was miraculously healed around about 6 years ago. When he called the elders to come and anoint him with oil, he's got sick again. It was our great joy the other day to go and anoint him with oil. We put buckets of oil on him, literally half a bottle of oil, trusting that God would honor his word here. The prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. Therefore, it says in verse 16, if you've sinned, confess your sins, because he says here, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. There is a working of God that happens in community, not in isolation, that this chapter is very clear to explain. Now we move to Proverbs 27. It says, do not boast about tomorrow, for you know that you don't know what one day is going to bring from the next. Remember when James was writing James, he was heavily influenced by the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus and by the book of Proverbs. Well, we know that James 4, he said almost these exact words, didn't he? Don't boast about tomorrow because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Then he talks about faithfulness. Better an open rebuke than hidden love. Better to know where you stand with somebody rather than to live in guessing. The wounds of a friend can be trusted. I can remember once I had to discipline a friend of mine. I was in a leadership capacity over him, and it was very difficult for me, and he was very offended. But he arrived at my house early in the morning, and he quoted this text. He says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. I know that you love me. That's why you pulled me up on that. Do not forsake your friend or your family. And don't do that. Don't leave there's a call to faithfulness here. And then it says, better a neighbor than a relative far away. And so faithful friends are what God puts around us, and that's why we do connect groups in local church. That's why we contend for far more than Sunday sermons. We contend for faithful friendships. If anyone loudly blesses his neighbor during the morning, it will be taken as a curse. That just speaks of good manners. And then I always am amused when Solomon complains about troublesome wives. He had so many of them, so small wonder he keeps. Verse 15 and 16, have a look at those. It's quite humorous. As iron sharpens iron, so one friend sharpens another. As we live out our lives together, it's not all plain sailing, but we're good for each other. That's what that basically is saying. And then verse 19 says, as water reflects a face, so one's life reflects a heart. I remember my English teacher at school saying to me, though your face, until you get to 40 years old, It's God's fault. He gave it to you. But your face after 50, well, that's your fault, because your crease lines are either smile lines or they're frown lines, or they're either chubby or they're either skinny. And so he's basically saying the water reflects the face, so one's life is reflected by the heart, and the face describes what's going on in the heart. The crucible for silver, the furnace for gold, people are tested by their praise. I remember Ray saying to me, Ray is the man who planted the church I lead long ago, and he said a man is more tested when he succeeds than when he fails. He's going to pray for me more when things are going well than when they're going badly. And that's what that verse says. That praise, success, is a bigger test than failure is. Anyway, God bless you.